As most of you know, we've been going through a journey ever since the beginning of this year. We made a commitment at our very first service that 2025 was going to be a year where we learned how to intentionally apprentice under Jesus, how to function as one of his apprentices, and just dedicating a year to learning how we can grow in that way and grow closer to him. So in doing this, we're doing several different little mini-series because we're using a book called Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer as kind of a guide. And we talked about how that book is to help us better understand the book and how to live it out. And how to, basically the idea that as a disciple of Jesus in first century Israel, it looks very different than discipling under Jesus in 21st century America. So how do we take the principles that were taught then and live them out now in America like we know it? So our first little mini-series we've been doing, this is week 3 of it now, and the mini-series is called Be With Jesus. Be with Jesus. And we talked about how a first century disciple, they would actually physically follow their rabbi around from place to place. So Peter, James, and John, the idea of being with Jesus was very, very literal. They were following him from place to place. But how do we do that now? Because we don't have Jesus physically in front of us to go follow around. So how do we incorporate that into our own lives? Week 1, we talked about the idea of trying to spend time with God when you're in the midst of the mundane task of life. You know, the things that we all have to do that require almost no brain power, folding laundry, shoveling snow, making dinner, waiting in line at the Chick-fil-A drive-thru. All of those are opportunities where we can connect with God while we're sitting there waiting or doing something that's a very mundane kind of task. So while our hands are doing one thing, our mind can be focused on God, and we can spend that time in prayer or talking with him. And then week 2, we talked about contemplative prayer, right? So not just any kind of prayer, but specifically contemplative prayer. And contemplative prayer is all about just being with Jesus. We said it was very different than New Age meditation. It was a way of we kind of try to empty ourselves so that we can be filled with God. And so the idea that we're spending time with him, it's not a time of really asking for a bunch of requests. It's more a time of adoration, of thanksgiving, and sometimes just sitting in the silence with Jesus and just being there with him. And so this week, this is the final week of our series, and it's really tough because there are so many different things we can look at for ways to be with Jesus. There's a multitude of different options out there. But for today, I'm not going to ask you to add one more spiritual discipline in your life. Because the bottom line is, for most of us, we don't have time to add much else into our lives. Our schedules are so packed with so much stuff, to ask you to add something else is going to be very difficult. So instead, I'm going to ask you to subtract, to take things away. And I think you'll find as we go through this, that this is going to be much harder than adding something else in. Holocaust survivor Corrie ten Boom once said that if the devil can't make you sin, he'll make you busy. If the devil can't make you sin, he'll make you busy. And how true is that? Because both things have the ability to take away your connection and your time with God. So the title of this section that I had you reading for anticipation of this message was, You Must Ruthlessly Eliminate Hurry from Your Life. That's what that little 4-page section you read was titled. Those 4 pages are a very brief summary of an entire book John Mark Comer did 5 years earlier, aptly titled The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. He devoted an entire book to going through this, and that's kind of the book that kind of put him on the map as a Christian author, really. He had other things out there before, but that's really what kind of pushed him up in notoriety in the Christian world. So in The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, he shares a story about his friend John Ortberg and theologian Dallas Willard. And the story goes something like this. John's a pastor of a mega church. He was actually a pastor at Willow Creek Church in the Chicago area. And he's also a best-selling author. And he got to a point where he felt like he needed to grow more spiritually. So he called his friend and mentor, Dallas Willard, and he basically asked him, what do I need to do to become the me that I want to be? And it says that Willard paused for a long time and then said, you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. And so John scribbled that down and said, okay, what else? Willard thought for another moment, then he said, there's nothing else. Hurry is the greatest enemy of spiritual life in our day. You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. And get this, he said that in the 90s, right? Like, how much busier are our lives now than they were back then? There's also in that book, he points out a study that was done where it was said that they measured the average attention span of humans. And they found in the year 2000, the average attention span of people is 12 seconds. So you got 12 seconds to get someone's attention before their mind is on to the next thing and they're not paying attention to you anymore. All right? So that was 7 years before the iPhone was ever invented, and the average attention span was 12 seconds. In 2015, it had dropped to 8 seconds. You have 8 seconds to get someone's attention before they're ready to move on to the next thing. And that's the average person. That doesn't count if you have ADHD. It's even harder. It's even shorter time period for you, right? So now the kicker is, this same study found out that goldfish have an attention span of 9 seconds. The goldfish are winning, and we are losing when it comes to our attention span. So he goes on to quote Microsoft researcher Linda Stone, who said, continuous partial attention is the new normal. Continuous partial attention is our new normal as a society. And this is so very true. You ever go over to someone's house where the TV's always running like all day long in the background? And you go sit down in the room where the TV is, and you're just there to have a conversation with them, and you're trying to talk, but your mind and you're constantly pulled back to the television because it's just there, it's going on in the background. And you can't give them your full attention, and they can't give you their full attention either. Or how about phones, right? Like that's the big one nowadays, right? I used to think that it was incredibly rude for someone to be on their phone when I was talking to them, just like scrolling through stuff. Now I've come to expect it. Like, I still think it's rude, but I just kind of get over it because it's just what happens so often now. We're just so used to it. Or how about family gatherings, right? Where like people literally like drive far distances or get on airplanes and fly to get somewhere to be together. And you get in the family gathering, you start hanging out, and next thing you know, everyone starts kind of retreating off into the corner and they're on their phones again going through stuff. Sometimes they're text messaging someone, right? They're messaging someone that didn't bother to come see them in person rather than talk to the person right in front of them. Or they're on some website or on Facebook or Instagram or something like that, watching TikTok videos, things they could be doing at home, but they're doing it when they're in the presence of their family that they literally traveled sometimes hundreds of miles to get to. Our lives are so packed full of stuff. How can we possibly add any more into them? These days, hurry has become the new normal. But the problem is, hurry for the most part is not a good thing. Noah read for us the fruit of the Spirit from Galatians chapter 5. And let's go through that again. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. These are the fruit of the Spirit. You know what's not on the list? Hurry. Right? Now, don't get me wrong. Like, absence from the list doesn't mean that it's a bad thing, right? Like hugging your mom is not a fruit of the Spirit. But I think we can all agree that like giving your mom a hug is a good thing, right? But part of how we can tell that is let's match that up to the fruit of the Spirit. Okay? So one of the fruit of the Spirit is love. So when you hug your mother, you're communicating love to your mother by doing that. Part of the fruit of the Spirit is joy. And when you hug your mother, you're bringing joy to her heart. So even if your mother is not here today for you to hug anymore, all those hugs over all those years you gave her, you communicated so much love and so much joy. You were communicating facets of the Holy Spirit to her by that simple act of giving her a hug. Now let's see how hurry stacks up against the fruit of the Spirit. Hurry is not a fruit of the Spirit, but patience is. Hurry actually robs us as patience, as we can't focus on what we're doing because we're trying to hurry on to the next thing. It takes patience away. It doesn't add to our patience. Hurry is not a fruit of the Spirit, but self-control is. And hurry makes it harder to exercise self-control. The following story you're about to hear is based on a true story, possibly from your own life. You're running late to get to fill in the blank. Church, your parents' house, friends or family. And you get yourself together and you're heading to the car, but fill in the blank is not ready yet, right? Your chronically late spouse, your child who can't ever seem to get their shoes on in time, whatever it might be. You're already running behind and you don't want to get any later than you already are, so you end up snapping at your spouse or snapping at your kid. It's not how you normally treat them and interact with them, but you end up doing it this time simply because you're hurried, you're frustrated, your self-control is sapped, and you just end up snapping. Hurry is not a fruit of the Spirit, but joy is. One of the greatest joys in life is being somewhere awesome and then being in the moment, right? Being fully embraced in the moment. I know our family, we go and we vacation in Myrtle Beach every single year because we love to go and be on the beach. And so every year, Amy and I always have a date night while we're at Myrtle Beach. And the date night, we've done lots of different things. We went and learned Carolina shag one year so that we could go out shag dancing that night. We do ballroom dancing sometimes. We've gone and listened to musicians play. But there's two things that are a part of our date every year. One of them is dinner out, and one of them is just a slow, leisurely walk along the beach, right? Because I wait all year for my beach walk with Amy. And so, just kind of walking right along the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, the water's just kind of lapping across your feet and just lazily walking up and back. And whenever we plan our date night, I make sure to have a large portion of time chunked out for the beach walk, right? So it's either well before dinner or right after dinner, but well before whatever our next activity is. Because if not, I'm not going to be present in the moment. If we get there and we have to leave in 15 minutes to be at dinner, then I'm already doing the calculations in my head. It's going to take me a minute to walk up onto the beach. Then we can go about 6 minutes in one direction, and then we got to turn around and come back in the other direction, because then I got 2 minutes left, and I'm going to need an extra minute to wash my feet off, right? And heaven help me if there's like a family of 4 with boogie boards and beach chairs hosing themselves off first, right? So I don't want to be rushed. I don't want to be checking my watch. So I chunk out a big chunk of time for that so I can just be present in the moment. So we can walk however far our conversation takes us as we go along the beach. Hurry robs us of that joy because it takes us out of the moment as we're trying to rush on to the next thing. And I can go on and on. Hurry causes us to be less kind, less gentle, less loving, feel less peaceful. Hurry quite frequently works against the Holy Spirit himself. As John Mark Comer points out, hurry is arguably the number one challenge you will face should you decide to take following Jesus seriously. Like an enemy, it won't just stand in your way, it will actually fight against you. Now, don't get me wrong. Not all hurry is bad. If you're at work and your pregnant wife calls you and says her water just broke, you better hurry up and get home and get her over to the hospital, right? Like, it's not always a bad thing, but for the most part, hurry pulls us farther from God. It doesn't draw us closer to him. And then let's look at Jesus, right? Because we're trying to figure out how to be with Jesus, how to be like Jesus. How did he handle this? No one had a larger impact on human history than Jesus. He accomplished so many things, and he only lived 33 years. And he didn't even start his ministry till he was 30 years old. So when you read his biographies in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the vast majority of what you're reading covers a 3-year time span. And think of all the great things Jesus did in 3 years. He taught people how to live the life that God intended them to live. He called people to repentance and helped them turn away from their sinful lifestyles. He cast out demons, healed sicknesses and diseases, raised dead people back to life. Really good stuff. But the Gospel of Luke tells us about a story where he healed a leper, and that's the story that I had Noah read for us today for our gospel reading. And he wanted the leper to kind of go away and not let everyone know about what happened, but the leper kind of blabbed and let everyone know that he got healed by this guy Jesus. And so it ends with saying this, "Yet news about him spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him, and he healed them of their sickness." Right? This is good, right? More and more people are hearing about Jesus and coming to him. That's a good thing. And then the next verse says, "But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed." Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. So why? Why was the Son of God, who was here for a very small period of time, constantly pulling himself away from crowds at different times to go away and spend time in prayer? It's because that's what we're made to do. God has created us to bring these times into our life of going away into some kind of silent place and being with Jesus, being with God. If anyone had an excuse to skip out on their prayer time, it was Jesus, right? After all, like, he was God and human at the same time, right? I'm not God, I'm purely human, but Jesus, he was fully God and fully human. But I think he did this for a couple reasons. One, he did it just because he wanted to have time with his Father. This was important to him. But I think he also did it for us, to set an example for us that we're not better than him, so why do we have to be busier than he was? We're not going to accomplish more than he did, so why can't we also take some time to pull back and have some quiet time with God together? But being busy has become such a part of our cultural norm. We all do it without even thinking about it. We fill our schedules up with stuff, and then we commit to more and more things. I once heard a pastor say that you accumulate so many new commitments over the course of the year that when the new year rolls around, you have to cut at least 10% off the top to start at the same place where you started the year before. Now, I don't know where he got that statistic from, but it's rang very true in my life. You just keep accumulating commitments, and it's hard to get rid of them. We run our lives to the max. We exhaust ourselves, and then we try to find different me-time activities to help us just kind of unwind and decompress from all the busyness. Now, I know you might be thinking, but Dan, I really like to be busy. Like, I don't like to just sit around idly. I need something to do at all times. I'm sorry, but I don't think that's healthy. The more I've looked at this, the more I've learned I don't think that's healthy. Remember I told you at the beginning this was going to be really hard, like harder than adding something in? Making space to be with Jesus takes time. If you want to take time to be with Jesus, you need time to offer him in the first place. So how do we make more time with Jesus? The way we do it is we ruthlessly eliminate hurry from our lives. To put it another way, we do addition by subtraction. We add time back into our lives by subtracting things back out. So where do we start? Because there's so many places you could look at for subtracting things out of your life to make more time and space for God. I kind of narrowed it down to 3 different things I want you to think about today, and these are the things I want you to kind of take away as action items as you go away from here. They're the ones that I think you'll get the most bang for your buck if you're working on these things. So the first one is taking an honest look at your job and how much of your time it takes up. Take an honest look at your job and how much of your time it takes up. Because if you're working for someone else, your employer will always, always, always take more of your time. They will take as much as you will give them, and they will keep wanting more. It's like a beast you can never fully feed. And if you work for yourself, sometimes that's even harder, right? Because like, where do you draw the line? There's no one to say it's quitting time, it's time to go home. You can work 24/7 if you want to, and there's always something that needs to get done. I can tell you, working in commission sales, it was incredibly hard, right? Because I don't care what time of day at night it was, when that phone rang or that text came through, that was money if I answered it, and it was possible money lost if I didn't. And it is so tempting to give away all your family time, even when you're home, because when you've got a slate of customers, stuff is always coming in, right? So taking a look at your job and seeing, do you need to set up some barriers, right? How much of your time is your job really taking? Do you need to set up some barriers, some boundaries in your life so that your job isn't overtaking too much of your time? Or do you look at your job and honestly say, the only way to do this job is to work more hours than what's required? I know when they were putting together, do you call it Dodge or Doge? Dodge, the group that's going through all the government efficiency stuff right now, I think the requirement was you need to be willing to work 80-hour work weeks to be a part of that. Like, if you're doing that, like, I don't know how you have any semblance of a family life after that, right? So taking an honest look at your job and seeing, can I do this job, period, and still have enough time left for my family and for God? Or if the answer is yes, but I just need to make some boundaries, where do you draw the boundaries? Where do you make changes? You all know I had to make some pretty major changes in my job career just recently, and I can't tell you how much time I've gotten back with my family and with God as a result of that, and it's been an incredible blessing. Second thing we look is our commitments. What commitments do you have? This is where you pull up your calendar and you look, what kind of weekly commitments, monthly commitments, do you have daily commitments? What are the commitments you have, and what needs to get cut back? Sometimes they're good things, right? Like this last year, I cut a Bible study out because I already had a youth Bible study, I had preaching here more, and I had an adult Bible study, and something just had to go. And I figured I had one more year with my kids before they go back to college. The adult Bible study, I can start back up at any time, and we can keep it going again. So what are some things in your life that you need to cut back? And sometimes you're going to disappoint people. And for some of you, that's going to be really hard because all of us don't want to let people down, but some of us by nature are people pleasers. And for my people pleasers in the room, it's really hard to say no. And our people pleasers, they're the ones that fill up their schedules first, I feel like, because they just want to keep everybody happy. They don't want to let anybody down. Right? Like I got a guy I used to work with where his daughter was really involved in the dance program at her school. And so when she was in high school, he got involved in the boosters, and he was very involved with raising money for the dance program at the school. And I remember a couple years after she left, I talked to him and I said, you know, how's Shannon doing? How's she doing at college? I bet you're happy not to be in the boosters anymore. You can probably guess it. He looked at me and he's like, well, She hadn't been there for 2 years, and he's still helping fundraise for the program simply because he couldn't say no, right? He didn't want to let people down. It was just one more commitment on his list of many in his life. And the third thing I want you to look at, and this is probably the one where I think you can get the most very quickly, is look at your time wasters. Look at the time wasters in your life, because we all have them, right? We run ourselves to the max, and then we have our things we go to for our me time. And don't get me wrong, me time is not a bad thing, but sometimes you'd be surprised at just how much time you waste. I recently read a statistic that said the average guy spends 10,000 hours playing video games by age 21. 10,000 hours by age 21. Now, I didn't believe it. I got two boys at home, and I didn't believe it. I'm like, that sounds high. So I started doing some very uncomfortable math. You see, most of us that are parents today realize that we need to put tech time limits on our kids, right? That's a big buzz, like in our generation, is tech time limits, because video games these days are so addictive that if you don't put a limit on your kids' amount of time in video games, they will play it 24/7. Right, and I thought I played a lot of video games when I was a kid, right? When I was a kid, it was more we were worried about TV was rotting our brains, and then video games came along. But the video games draw you in so much more now than the ones that did on the old Nintendo system or the old Atari. And so we put tech time limits on our kids. So let's do a little bit of quick math. Let's say your kid has a 3-hour tech time limit, right? And let's say that they faithfully never go over by even 1 minute. They do their 3-hour tech time, and that's it. Over the course of the year, they spend 1,095 hours playing video games, right? So that means if you start playing video games at age 11, you get all the way up to 10 and you never played a video game in your life, and you play from 11 to 21 with a 3-hour tech time limit, you're well over 10,000 hours at that point, right? And who really doesn't play any video games until they turn 11 years old? So let's look at it another way. Let's say I have a special power where I can allow you to play, to do whatever your form of leisure is of choice, 24/7, 365. No need to sleep, no need to eat, no need to use a bathroom until you've done it as long as you did it all of last year spread across time. So if you have a 3-hour tech time limit and you faithfully follow that limit, then if you started playing video games when the ball dropped at midnight this year, you would have been done playing video games at 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon, just in time to be at church if we hadn't gotten postponed, right? But no, last year was actually a leap year, so you have 3 more hours, so you wouldn't have been done until 6 o'clock yesterday, nonstop, just to match the amount of video games you played last year, right? So think about that for a minute. Over a month and a half of your year last year was spent playing video games. Imagine all the things you could do at that amount of time. Now, let's say you have a more generous parent and you have a 5-hour tech time limit, right? So you can play up to 5 hours a day. That's 75 days, nonstop, 24/7, playing video games. You could start when the ball dropped, and you wouldn't be done till March 16th. Almost a quarter of your year given up to video games. Let's say you like to unwind in the evening. Let's say you don't watch hardly any TV at all, but you just like to unwind with a good, say, Hallmark rom-com movie in the evening before you go to bed, right? Hey, I watch them with you too, right? So let's say you just watch a 2-hour Hallmark movie before bed, right? That would be 30 days of watching low-budget rom-com movies a year, right? The month of February cannot contain the amount of low-budget rom-com you watched last year, right? That's what it turns into. And then what about social media? Okay, so according to broadband.com, the average person, and this is the average person regardless of age, and this is across many different countries, the average person spends 2 hours and 27 minutes on social media every single day. TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, others out there too. 2 hours and 27 minutes every day. That's 37 days of literally scrolling on your phone that you're doing. 37 days of your year last year you gave up to that. And that's the average. When you get to teens, teenage girls is over 5 hours a day scrolling social media, taking in whatever the Facebook or TikTok algorithm says you ought to be taking in right now. So if you want to have more time to be with Jesus, the first thing we can do is we can start identifying where are we wasting our time. right? It doesn't mean all these things are bad. It doesn't mean they can't be used in moderation. But think about how much time you could give to Jesus if you weren't spending so many hours of time wasted on those things. And I know you might be thinking, but that's my me time. That's my unwind time. But what if our me time was spent with God? What if that was what we look forward to in the day when we wanted time to unwind? So why don't we do that, right? Like, we've got access to God all the time. Why is God not our me time? I thought about this, and as I did, I came up with two very uncomfortable answers. The first one is, the other things are easier, right? It's easier to scroll. It's easier to turn on the TV. It's easier to play the video game than to spend time with God. And the other answer I came up with is even more disturbing. It's more fun, right? And I hate to say it, but for so many of us, like, we do those things because it's more fun than spending time with God, right? But I can't tell you how much of my adult life I have spent, and even my teenage years, trying to convince people around me that they should give 15 minutes of their day to God every day. Take 15 minutes somewhere in your day and spend it prayer, Bible reading, whatever you do to connect with God. Take 15 minutes a day. I've gone over and over with so many people, and so many people never take me up on it, right? So many people don't ever get to the point where they could do that. But imagine if you could spend an hour of your day with God. And imagine if that was the best part of your day. Imagine if that's the part you look forward to and you couldn't wait to get to in your day because it was just so good. It energized you the same way that your me time activities today do that. Imagine a life with less Netflix and more Jesus. Less Instagram, more Jesus. Less football, more Jesus. Less shopping, more Jesus. Less time on our phones and more time with Jesus. Imagine if you could enjoy spending time with Jesus even more than playing your favorite video game, watching TV, or scrolling social media. Now, I've been pretty honest and upfront with you all as we've gone through this series because I started this book back in the fall, and so I've got just a little bit of head start on you guys of trying to live out the principles of this book. So I've been spending a little bit of time trying to figure out how to be with Jesus and be in the moment. And so I've made, as you know, changes to my job. I've cut back commitments. And recently I started looking at the time wasters and trying to figure out what are the time wasters in my life. And I think I've been pretty upfront that the biggest time waster in my life is my phone, right? And so just this past week I started targeting this even more because I've been trying throughout the year now to be on my phone less and be available and open to God more. So I told you already that I've got 3 days a week where I've got like my time with God in the chair, over in the corner, in the family room, by the window, where that's like my time. That's Saturday, Sunday, Monday. The 3 days I don't have to get up at 5:15. I go down there and I spend time with God before I get my day going. And that has become a more and more enjoyable part of my day as I've incorporated it in more and more. So what I started doing now is, what am I doing with the other 4 days? Like, sometimes I pray a little bit, sometimes I read, sometimes, honestly, most of the time I get up at 5:15, and usually for about a half an hour, I'm just mindlessly on my phone until I hop in the shower, just kind of getting myself together. And so I started deciding, no, I'm going to cut that out. I'm going to cut the phone time out, going to get out of bed, get in the shower right away. And what did I find? I had 15, 20 minutes extra before I had to leave for work. So what did I start doing? I headed over to my chair. I headed over to that special place, and I took that time that I had been wasting in the morning reading political articles or on NFL.com and just spending it with God, and it's been so much more rewarding than what I was doing before. I've grown so much over these past few months just trying to be with Jesus. And I can tell you, some days, especially in the beginning, it was hard, difficult, awkward, clumsy. Some days it was even boring, and I was just waiting for that time to get on so I could get to the next point. But I kept going at it, and as I've done it more and more, it's becoming life-changing. And I'm finding more and more times in my life where I've got a few minutes here or there, and rather than grabbing my phone back up, I'm sitting down somewhere and I'm spending some time with God. I'm finding more and more how to steal time with Him all throughout my day, and it just keeps Him on my mind more, and it keeps me more focused on Him. It brings me more joy, brings me less angst. And so I've been living it out myself, and I'm just getting started. I can't imagine 1, 2, 5 years down the road where I'm going to be if I keep this up. And so that's my encouragement for us. What is God calling you to cut back right now? Remember, the reward of being with Jesus is Jesus. And what if it really felt like a reward to us? Addition by subtraction, adding time with God by subtracting things out of our life is going to be hard. I told you it's harder than trying to add something in because we're so used to the things we do right now. But do you really want to be too busy to follow Jesus? I don't think any of us wants to be too busy to follow Jesus. Or do you want more time in your life to focus on the one that gives us life in the first place? Do you want more time in your life to focus on life-giving things? More time to spend with the God who loved you so much he sent his son to die for you. Now, don't do this out of guilt. I'm not trying to guilt anyone into doing this. Do this because the reward is Jesus. If it's awkward, if it's clumsy at first, keep going, keep persevering through. Being with Jesus is such a privilege, and it just brings so much into your life. I would love for each and every one of us to be able to have more time to be with him. And don't worry, if you're worried, I'm going to cut things out, then I'll just have nothing to do and I'll just be bored silly. We've got other things we'll be talking about to add back into your life to bring Jesus more into it. But it starts with making space for him now. I look at him, he looks at me, and we are happy. We all have time and space in our life for that. Let's pray. God, I thank you for bringing us together as a congregation today. I thank you that despite the weather yesterday, you were still able to give us a way to get together this week. God, I thank you that you love us so much that you want to spend time with us. You are not a distant God that sets things in motion and lets them go. You desire time with us. And God, it's so easy for us to give that time up. The time we could give you, we can give it to a million other things because there's always something calling at our attention, always something that wants us. The demands on our life, the jobs we have, our family commitments, the things we do to just unwind and waste time. So many things call to us, God. God, allow us to silence the distractions, to start making changes in our lives. Maybe it's a small change. Maybe it's just 15 minutes a day we're able to carve out. Maybe it's a bigger change. Maybe we start cutting more drastically. Whatever it is, God, make the changes help us to make the changes in our life so that we have more time and space for you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.